Close your eyes and go back to before 1500, when these lands already had names, paths, and memories. 3 clues guide you: an ice bridge connecting continents, ancient bonfires in Chile, paintings in Piauí, and an ancestral face in Minas Gerais. Who were they? Where did they come from? When did they arrive? And why does this change everything you've learned about discovery? In a few minutes, we'll follow the trails that crossed oceans without boats, unraveling what science already knows and what still intrigues. Stay with me. By the end, you'll be able to answer. Where did the first Brazil come from? You've heard the 3 clues, so we begin before 1500, when these lands already had paths and memories. Here the word discovery doesn't open the first chapter. It appears in the middle of the story. Millions of people lived among rivers, mountains, and forests, with names for each place, routes connecting villages, languages that told of origins and kinship. There was forest management, agriculture adapted to each biome, trade networks that crossed the coast and the interior, ceramics with their own styles, graphics that marked belonging. Think of a map of Brazil without borders, just waterways and trails. It is through them that life flows. Children learn along the way, elders keep stories, hunters and gatherers read time in the stars and in the migration of animals. When caravels appear on the horizon, they don't arrive in a void, but in a living world that already knows how to navigate rivers, cultivate, build, heal, and celebrate. It is this repositioning that matters. Calling 1500 an encounter changes the question we ask. Instead of who discovered Brazil, we ask who was here, how long ago, and by what trails they arrived. Hold on to this key, because in the next step we will go back even further to the Ice Age, to understand how humanity set foot in the Americas and gradually opened the routes that end on these shores. You have gazed at these shores teeming with life. Now we need to turn the map back in time, to when the sea was lower and the cold drew new boundaries. At the height of the Ice Age, continents that today seem distant became closer, and routes that today are water were land and ice. Between Siberia and Alaska existed a corridor of tundra, dry and cold, but teeming with large herds that hunters and gatherers knew how to follow. Where today we see a strait, there was a bridge, and across it human groups advanced little by little, camping, waiting for the climate to clear a passage, moving as the food moved. As the ice began to retreat, 2 paths gained strength. Inland, an ice-free corridor opened between the great glacial sheets, allowing descent to the plains and valleys. Along the coast, light canoes and footsteps on the beach followed the strip rich in seaweed, fish, and shellfish, a natural highway that some call the Kelp Highway. In both cases, no one set out with a final destination. People went wherever the world allowed, stopping when there was fresh water, wood, and shelter, and starting again when the seasons changed. These waves weren't a single wave, nor did they belong to a single people. They were migrations at different times, families separating and reuniting, new languages emerging, techniques adapting to mountains, deserts, and gigantic rivers. From then on, America ceased to be a frontier and became home, and the route south became increasingly viable. Now, before we look down at the map, we need to step onto the ground and examine the clues left by time. In Monte Verde, in southern Chile, extinguished fires, plant fibers, and tools show people living there over 13,000 years ago. Enough time to prove that Southern America was already home, when the ice was still retreating in the north. In Piauí, in the Serra da Capivara, painted walls, ancient fireplaces, and worked flakes tell a long story of human presence, with dates that spark debate, some indicating very ancient occupations, others calling for caution and new analyses. In Minas Gerais, in the caves of Lagoa Santa, bones and burials, such as the skull known as Luzia, reveal people adapted to a Brazil of savannas and forests, living, burying their dead, and leaving traces of daily life. Each site is a piece of the same puzzle. Stone tools that repeat themselves, hunting and gathering techniques, shelter choices intersecting timelines. There is consensus on something central. There was enough time for human groups to enter the continent, spread across valleys and coasts, and reach what is now Brazil, long before 1500. What remains unclear is how early this began and which routes each wave took. With this evidence in hand, we now move down the map from north to south to understand how these trails connected, to form the first presences here. With these pieces in hand, we move down the map. Hunter-gatherer peoples followed climate, water, and food. And the Americas offer two great avenues. Costa Rica, rich in fish and shellfish, and the interior, guided by valleys and ice-free corridors. Groups advance in waves, some skirting islands, others crossing plains and mountain passes, camping for seasons, learning routes, leaving fires and tools, setting up camp and continuing on. Dispersal accelerates when the ice retreats and rivers become roads. In the north, basins like the Mackenzie and Yukon connect plains. Further south, the Columbia and Colorado valleys open up, and soon the river network takes over the continent. The Orinoco connects with the Amazon, which in turn unfolds into thousands of branches, a network that pulls us deeper into what is now the Amazon. Light canoes cut through streams and creeks. Trails follow interfluves, floodplains become stopping points. Knowledge about plants and flood cycles accumulates. Across the Atlantic, the coast offers another thread of dispersion. Dunes, cliffs, mangroves, reefs and estuaries teeming with fish and mollusks. Further inland, plateaus and plateaus, unlike those found in the center-west today, connect basins from the Madeira to the Tapajos, from the Xingu to the Tocantins, from Paraguay to the Paraná. To the east, routes ascend the San Francisco and descend to the coast, connecting Sertoys and beaches. Each river is a road, each watershed a crossroads. And so, seasonal villages become networks, networks become territories. It wasn't a single march. It involved several waves at different times. Families split, techniques adapt, languages emerge and diverge. Following herds first, then fishing and initial farms. These groups reached areas we now call north, northeast, southeast and south of Brazil, occupying caves, rock shelters, river terraces and sandbanks. The path blazed across the continent now meets these shores, and it is here that our history deepens. In the next step, we will locate these early presences in Brazil, who they were and where they left their mark. The trails blazed by rivers and the coast led here, and the first footprints are visible. In the interior of what is now Minas Gerais and Goiás, rock shelters and caves preserve ancient fires, stone tools and careful burials. As in Lagoa Santa and the limestone valleys surrounding the region, lives adapted to fields and forests that changed with the seasons. In the northeast, cliffs in Piauí, Bahia and Rio Grande do Norte reveal hearths, scrapers and paintings depicting hunts, rituals and journeys. This presence has been repeated for centuries in shelters such as those in Serra da Capivara. Along the coast, communities settle in bountiful encampments and leave behind mounds of shells and fish bones. The sambaques from Espírito Santo to Santa Catarina, signs of villages that return to the same spot, fishing, trading, and burying their dead with artifacts and ornaments. In the north, stretches of the Great River make way for camps on higher terraces. Canoes cut through streams. Useful seeds begin to be tended near the fire. A knowledge of the floods dictates the calendar of life. In the center east and south, fields and forests alternate. Projectile points and flaking workshops mark passages and returns. Routes that connect plateaus to valleys. It's not a single point on the map. It's a range of presences that repeat and transform. Similar tools in distant places, different recipes for solving the same problem. Water, shelter, food, belonging. Over time, these nuclei become networks, and these networks shape territories. This is where the diversity that precedes 15 linguistic families, ways of life and alliances that cross rivers and mountains arises. In the next step, we will open this mosaic to see the richness that was already here when the sails appeared on the horizon. These nuclei, becoming networks, created a living mosaic, and before the encounter with the sails there were many embers. On the coast and in the Amazon, Tupi-Guarani peoples occupied riverbanks and beaches. Canoes cut through estuaries, villages around communal houses, and farms turned the forest with fire management and soil rest. In the Central Plateau and south, Macrog peoples organized territories into fields and mountains. Ancient paths connected springs. Rituals marked the calendar. In the Amazon basin and northern borders, Arawak and Caribbean families wove exchange networks across great rivers. Ceramics with their own styles circulated alongside seeds, pigments, and stories. Other trunks and languages completed the Pano-Nyangatu picture, emerging as a contact language much later, a geography spoken in many languages. Subsistence also varied. In Vasia environments, sweet and bitter cassava sustained villages with flour, beju's, and kaim. In the south and part of the center-west, Corn gained ground alongside beans, pumpkins, and peppers. In some bakwis in the southeast and south, the sea provided fish and shellfish in known cycles. In the interior, hunting and gathering followed the seasons, managing palm trees, nuts, and fruits that shaped the forest itself. Terra preta, soils enriched by generations, proved that the environment was cared for and constructed, not just occupied. Culture tied it all together. Body painting and ceramic graphics marked belonging. Featherwork and instruments spoke of alliances, rites of passage and healing organized time, and decisions were made in assemblies that included elders and war leaders. And peace. Trade routes connected the coast to the interior. Salt, shells, stones, resins, and paints crossed rivers along with news and marriages that sealed pacts. There was conflict. There was diplomacy. There were clear rules for living among neighbors. This is the country that existed when the ships appeared on the horizon, diverse, articulate, with routes and names for each shore. In the next step, we will look at 1500 as an encounter, not a beginning, and see what changes when two worlds face each other for the first time. This mosaic was already alive when the sails appeared on the horizon. So 1500 doesn't open the story. It changes the rhythm. The ships anchor off a coast that has a name, an owner, and a calendar. On this side, villages with farms, canoes, and paths. On the other side, men who read the world with other instruments, astrolabes, charts, and crosses. The encounter begins with astonishment, continues with curiosity, and from the first gesture demands translation. The first conversations involve objects, beads for fish, metal for food, knives for good wood. Each side assigns different values to the same thing. For some, the shell represents memory and status. For others, it's an ornament. For some, land is a relative not to be sold. For others, it's a title to be registered. In exchanges, everyone feels they've won. Between the lines, silent rules intersect without understanding each other. Language tries to accompany gestures, songs, and repeated words until they become bridges. Soon, the first interpreters emerge, people who move between worlds and try to weave meanings together. Even so, misunderstandings are inevitable. A touch that was an invitation becomes an offense. An offering that was an alliance becomes a demand. A sign of hospitality is read as possession. Space also changes. Improvised ports redirect canoe routes. Seaside villages receive frequent visitors. News travels along the rivers. Old alliances need to be renegotiated. Some groups see advantages in getting closer, multiplying tools and strengthening themselves against rivals. Others prefer to retreat, to protect their paths, to keep their distance from a power that arrives with iron and writes on paper. The sacred enters the scene. Crosses planted in the sand are read as marks of presence. Songs and processions intersect with local rituals. For those arriving, mapping is taking charge. Drawing coastlines and currents is transforming the world into a route. For those staying, naming is belonging. Keeping the name in place is keeping the place in the body. There are moments of celebration and admiration, mirrors in hands, metals that don't break, new stories around the fire. There are moments of tension, invisible fences, demands spoken as requests, orders pronounced as blessings. The encounter oscillates between agreement and friction, and with each shift, the scales tip more toward those who bring written gunpowder and reinforcements from the sea. This is where our narrative requires caution, because the curiosity that brought us closer also carried seeds of rupture. With the caravels came habits, contracts, and diseases against which these shores had no defense. In the next step, we'll see how this arrival displaced entire populations and why the life toll dropped so rapidly in such a short time. Curiosity paved the way, but with it came contracts, fences, and incurable diseases. First came fevers, smallpox, measles, and flu. Bodies that had never encountered these viruses were left defenseless. Entire villages fell ill, healers were unable to cope, care rituals multiplied, and grief cut off ancient roots. In just a few years, the number of people fell from millions to far fewer. Families broke apart, territories were left empty. As the disease advanced, other pressures grew. Forced labor, captures on expeditions, wars fueled by unequal alliances. Trade routes became routes of captivity. What had been common territory became a sesmaria with a written owner. Access to fishing and farming was blocked by fences that no one here had accepted. Those who resisted were punished. Those who retreated lost their way and their relatives. European religion and law rewrote the landscape. Missions concentrated people under new rules. The language changed. Rituals were monitored. Internal politics suffered cuts. Epidemics came in waves. Between one and the next, new demands arose, tributes, forced displacements. Entire peoples had to move, merge villages, hide their knowledge, negotiate to survive. Even so, there was a response. Alliances between groups, leaders who sought less cruel pacts, escapes to higher ground, reclaiming lost paths. The thread of continuity was not broken. It was reconnected many times with pain and ingenuity. It is on this thread that history reaches today. In the next step, we will see how this presence was reorganized, how movements defending territory and life emerged. And why does recognizing this continuity change the way we tell the story of Brazil's origins? This thread, reconnected with pain, has reached today, and it didn't arrive alone. It arrived organized. In many regions, people reclaimed ancient villages, rebuilt paths, built assembly houses, and strengthened war and peace leaders. Territories regained their names. Rivers became roads again. Festivals once again marked the calendar. Where there was loss, there was also replanting. Diverse farms, forest management, guardians tending springs, seeds and stories. The language remained as a home. Children learn ancestral words at the village school. Prayers, songs and graphics live on. Ceramics and featherwork continue to say who's who. Partnerships with universities and research centers add to our own knowledge. Maps are made together, stories are recorded, collections are protected. There are councils, associations and regional organizations that defend land, health and education, and that bring their voices to cities and courts. Not everything is a victory. The pressure for land and resources continues, but so does the response. Alliances between peoples, vigils, community agreements, campaigns that crisscross the country. The indigenous presence today is not a residue of the past. It is a project for the future, with its own ways of living, making decisions, and caring for the territory. Recognizing this continuity changes the initial question. We didn't start in 1500. We started much earlier and continue here. Now that you see the entire path from the ice to today's villages, the promised answer remains. After all, which route has the most evidence? And what does science support most clearly so far? You've seen that the presence remains alive. So here's the direct answer we promised. What science supports most strongly today is that the ancestors of indigenous peoples came from Asia in multiple waves, taking advantage of a different north than today, with sea levels and passages over land and ice. Some groups descended through an inland corridor when the great glaciers retreated. Others followed the Pacific coast, using the strip rich in fish and algae, a natural highway of beach and canoe. The lines of evidence intersect. Archaeology shows very ancient occupations in the south of the continent, such as Monteverde in Chile, around 13,000 years ago, as well as sites in Brazil, such as Lagoa Santa in Minas Gerais, with burials around 11,000 years old, and debated records in Piauí that suggest possibly older presences. Genetics indicates kinship with Asian populations, with variations that point to more than one migratory wave over millennia. Linguistics and material culture reinforce the idea of a broad dispersion, with ramifications that generated the diversity seen on the eve of 1500. The consensus is essentially entry through the Bering region and rapid expansion across the continent, with arrivals in what is now Brazil long before the Portuguese arrived. The detailed debate revolves around exactly when it began, how many waves there were, how much the coastal route weighed in relation to the interior corridor, and which extreme dates resist further analysis. It works this way: consolidating the trunk, revising the branches, adjusting the clock with each discovery. What this changes for us is simple and profound. Before 1500, there were already paths, names and memories, and the origin of Brazil passes through these long routes that connect tundras to tropical rivers. With the answer delivered, we close the cycle in the next step, tying together beginning and end and inviting you to continue on to the next story. If this journey from the ice to the rivers of Brazil made you see the beginning with new eyes, don't let this discovery stop here. Leave a like now. It shows me that it's worth continuing to tell stories that don't always fit into school textbooks. Subscribe. That way, you'll come back with me on future trails and tell me in the comments which chapter you want to open. First, coastal routes, ancient agriculture. or another clue that caught your attention, think of someone who will enjoy learning about it. Of this, send this video to that person, family, group of friends. You become the link that keeps this conversation alive. And since you've come this far, stay with me. Click on the video that's showing on the screen now. The next part awaits you. Same approach, more answers. I'll meet you there, M.